Jonathan Roumie was mid-sentence when everything stopped. The studio lights were bright. The cameras were rolling. Millions of viewers were watching live. He had been smiling just moments earlier, calm, composed, grateful. The host was praising his performance, calling it one of the most powerful portrayals of faith in modern television. Jonathan nodded humbly, hands folded, listening carefully. Then his phone vibrated. At first, he ignored it. A second vibration followed. Longer this time. Jonathan's eyes flicked downward for less than a second, but that single glance changed everything. The smile faded. His posture stiffened. His breathing slowed, as if the air in the room had suddenly grown heavier. The host noticed immediately. "Jonathan, are you okay?" Jonathan didn't answer. He stared at the phone again, this time longer. His lips parted slightly. His eyes shimmered. Whatever name was on that screen had shaken him in a way no award, no applause, no criticism ever had. The audience leaned forward. Producers exchanged nervous looks behind the cameras. A red light blinked, signaling the show was still live. No one cut away. No one spoke. Finally, Jonathan lifted his head. I'm sorry," he said softly, his voice already breaking. "I wasn't expecting this." The host tried to ease the moment. "Do you need a minute?" Jonathan swallowed hard. "No," he whispered. I think I need to answer." He hesitated before pressing the button, his hands trembling just slightly, enough for the cameras to catch it. The call connected. Jonathan listened. His eyes widened. Then, slowly, tears began to form. The studio fell into absolute silence. After a few seconds that felt like an eternity, Jonathan spoke again, barely above a whisper. "Your Holiness." The words hit the room like thunder. The host froze. The audience gasped. Social media exploded in real time. Jonathan Roumie was receiving a call from Pope Leo XIV, live on television. No script. No warning. No preparation. As Jonathan listened, his composure completely unraveled. Tears streamed freely now, unchecked. He nodded again and again, unable to speak, as though every word on the other end of the line was reaching places deep inside him that had never been touched before. Viewers at home felt it too. This wasn't acting. This wasn't performance. This was raw, unfiltered emotion, faith colliding with reality in the most unexpected way possible. And whatever Pope Leo XIV was saying, it was about to change Jonathan Roumie forever. To understand why that phone call shattered Jonathan Roumie in real time, you have to understand what led him there. Long before the cameras. Long before the applause. Long before millions recognized his face as the image of Jesus on their screens. Jonathan Roumie's journey had never been easy. 4 years, he lived in small apartments, scraping by on voiceover work, auditions that went nowhere, and roles so small they barely paid the rent. There were moments when faith felt like the only thing he had left. Moments when success seemed like a promise meant for other people. He prayed often. Not for fame. Not for recognition. But for purpose. He asked one simple question again and again. If this is the path you want me to walk, give me the strength to stay on it. Then came The Chosen. At first, it didn't feel like a breakthrough. It felt like a risk. A crowd-funded project. A role portraying Jesus, something that could either elevate his life or end his career entirely. Friends warned him. Industry voices doubted it. But Jonathan said yes. And when the series began to reach hearts around the world, something unexpected happened. People didn't just recognize him, they thanked him. Letters poured in. Messages came from prisons, hospitals, war zones, and homes broken by grief. People told him the show had brought them back to faith. That it helped them forgive. That it gave them hope when nothing else could. Jonathan carried those stories quietly. He never saw himself as the source, only a vessel. Still, the weight of responsibility grew heavier with every passing season. Because portraying faith publicly isn't easy. Every word is examined. Every action judged. Every mistake magnified. Jonathan felt that pressure deeply. He constantly questioned himself. Am I doing this with humility? Am I honoring the message, Or myself? Am I enough? That doubt followed him even into success. The day of the live interview was meant to be simple. A conversation about art, belief, and the impact of storytelling. Jonathan arrived early, dressed plainly, carrying himself with the same quiet demeanor he always had. Behind the scenes, staff greeted him warmly. The host complimented his work, calling it transformational. Jonathan smiled politely, thanked them, and took his seat beneath the studio lights. But inside, he felt unusually restless, as if something unseen was approaching. Moments before going live, Jonathan checked his phone. Several missed calls. Unknown numbers. International codes he didn't recognize. He assumed it was a mistake. He silenced the phone. The show began. The host asked thoughtful questions about faith in modern media, about the responsibility of representing sacred stories in a divided world. Jonathan answered carefully, choosing words with intention. He spoke about service, humility, and the idea that real power is quiet. The audience responded warmly. Heads nodded. Applause followed. Everything was going perfectly. Then, halfway through the interview, the phone vibrated. Jonathan ignored it. Again, it vibrated. He tried to focus on the host's question, but something tugged at his attention. A strange feeling settled in his chest. Not fear, not excitement, but something deeper. A sense of gravity. He glanced down. The number was unfamiliar. But the country code wasn't. His breath caught. For a moment, he told himself it meant nothing. That it was coincidence. That he was overthinking. Still, his heart began to race. The phone vibrated a third time. This time, Jonathan couldn't ignore it. The host noticed the shift immediately. The pause, the distant look, the way Jonathan's voice softened mid-sentence. That was the moment viewers saw something change. Not a celebrity reacting. A man responding to something sacred. Jonathan had received messages from religious leaders before. Letters of appreciation. Public acknowledgments. But this was different. Deep down, he felt it before he knew it. The call wasn't meant to interrupt him. It was meant to reach him. As the host gently asked if he was all right, Jonathan hesitated. The decision weighed heavily on him. Answering meant breaking protocol. It meant surrendering control. It meant vulnerability in front of millions. But ignoring it felt wrong. As if turning away from a moment he had prayed for without ever daring to imagine. Jonathan lifted the phone, his hand unsteady now. And when he pressed answer, he wasn't thinking about the cameras. He was thinking about every prayer whispered in silence. Every doubt carried alone. Every step taken without certainty, only faith. And on the other end of that call was a voice that would soon confirm something Jonathan had needed to hear his entire life. The second Jonathan Roumie lifted the phone, time inside the studio seemed to bend. The audience could feel it, something unseen tightening the air, pressing down on every breath. The host stopped speaking. The cameras didn't cut away. No music swelled. No producer intervened. This was real. Jonathan held the phone just above the table, staring at the screen as if it might vanish if he looked away too long. His thumb hovered over the answer button. His heartbeat was loud in his ears, so loud it drowned out everything else. He closed his eyes. For a brief moment, memories flooded in. Late nights alone in quiet rooms. Auditions that ended in silence. Prayers whispered when no one else was listening. He had asked for clarity. He had asked for purpose. He had asked for strength. But he had never asked for this. The phone vibrated again. Jonathan opened his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said softly, almost to himself. "I need to take this." The host nodded slowly, unsure what was unfolding but instinctively aware that interrupting would be a mistake. Jonathan pressed answer. At first, there was nothing but silence. Then, a breath. A calm, steady presence on the other end of the line. "Jonathan," the voice said gently. Just hearing his name caused his shoulders to drop, as if something heavy he had been carrying for years suddenly loosened its grip. His lips trembled. He couldn't speak yet. "Yes," he finally whispered. "This is Leo." Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. Not Leo as a title. Not Leo as an idea. But a real voice. Warm. Human. Present. The voice continued, measured and kind. I hope I'm not interrupting. Jonathan shook his head instinctively, forgetting for a moment that the caller couldn't see him. No, no, Your Holiness, he said, his voice already cracking. The words echoed through the studio microphones. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. The host's eyes widened. A producer pressed a hand to their mouth. Somewhere in the back row, someone quietly began to cry. Jonathan listened. The Pope spoke slowly, deliberately, as if each word had been chosen with care. I wanted to speak to you personally, the voice said. Not as an actor. Not as a public figure. But as a man of faith. Jonathan nodded again, tears welling now, blurring his vision. The Pope continued. There are many who portray stories of belief, he said. But few do so with humility. With reverence. With the understanding that faith is not performed, it is lived. Jonathan covered his mouth with his hand. His chest tightened. All the doubts he had carried, the fear of misrepresenting something sacred, the worry that he wasn't worthy, that he would fail the responsibility placed upon him, rose to the surface all at once. And then, something happened. The Pope said words Jonathan had never expected to hear. You have reminded people not of a character, the voice said, but of compassion. Jonathan broke. A single tear slipped free, then another. His shoulders shook as he struggled to remain composed. The cameras captured everything, the rawness, the vulnerability, the humanity of the moment. The Pope went on. There are those who have returned to prayer because of you, he said. Those who have forgiven after years of anger. Those who have found hope when they believed none remained. Jonathan tried to speak, but no words came out. All he could do was listen. This is not small, the Pope said gently. And it is not unnoticed. The weight of those words landed heavily. Jonathan had spent years reminding himself that the work wasn't about him. That he was only a vessel. That recognition didn't matter. But hearing those words, from a voice representing millions of believers around the world, felt different. It wasn't praise. It was affirmation. The Pope paused. Then he said something that would stay with Jonathan for the rest of his life. Do not doubt the path you are walking, the voice said. You are exactly where you are meant to be. Jonathan lowered his head. Tears streamed freely now, no longer restrained. His hands trembled. The studio was silent, not out of shock, but out of reverence. No one moved. No one spoke. No one dared to break the moment. Jonathan finally found his voice. Thank you, he whispered. I never imagined. The Pope smiled on the other end of the line. Jonathan could hear it in his voice. Faith often works that way, he said. Quietly. Until it doesn't. The call ended gently. Jonathan stared at the phone in his hand as if it were something sacred. He placed it slowly on the table, then looked up. His face was wet with tears. His eyes red. His expression completely unguarded. I'm sorry, he said to the room, though no apology was needed. The audience rose to their feet. Not in celebration, but in respect. Because they hadn't just witnessed a phone call. They had witnessed a moment when doubt met destiny, and lost. For several seconds after the call ended, no one spoke. Not the host. Not the audience. Not the producers behind the cameras. Jonathan Roumie remained seated, hands resting on the table, eyes lowered. His breathing was slow but uneven, like someone who had just surfaced after being underwater for too long. The phone lay beside him, screen dark now, silent, but its presence still felt overwhelming. The studio lights hummed softly above. The host was the first to move. He cleared his throat, then stopped. Whatever words he had prepared no longer felt appropriate. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was something else entirely. Jonathan finally looked up. His face was raw. No performance. No filter. No attempt to regain composure for the camera. The tears had stopped, but their trace remained, shining under the lights. I didn't plan for that, Jonathan said quietly. The host shook his head. I don't think anyone could. A few people in the audience let out soft, nervous laughs, not because the moment was light, but because they were human, trying to breathe again. Jonathan pressed his palms together, as if grounding himself. For a long time, he continued, I've tried to remind myself that this work isn't about validation, that it's about service. He paused, swallowing hard. But sometimes, you still wonder if you're doing it right. His voice cracked again, just slightly. The host leaned forward. What did that call mean to you? Jonathan didn't answer immediately. He looked out at the audience, faces filled with emotion, curiosity, empathy. Some people were wiping their eyes. Others sat completely still, afraid to move. Jonathan exhaled. It meant, he said slowly, that faith isn't invisible. That single sentence landed hard. Around the world, social media was already erupting. Clips of the moment were spreading in real time. Comments poured in faster than moderators could read them. This feels holy. I'm crying and I don't even know why. This is what humility looks like. Back in the studio, Jonathan continued. When you choose humility, he said, you don't expect acknowledgement. You just hope that it helps someone. He glanced briefly at the phone again. To hear that it reached people who needed it, that's more than I ever hoped for. The host nodded slowly. I think, he said, you just gave a lot of people something they didn't know they needed. Jonathan smiled faintly through the emotion. Behind the scenes, producers were scrambling, not to stop the broadcast, but to protect the moment. They signaled the crew to hold the shot. No cutaways. No graphics. Just stillness. The audience stood again, this time not all at once, but gradually. One person rose. Then another. Then another, until the entire room was on its feet. There was no cheering. Only applause. Slow. Steady. Respectful. Jonathan looked stunned. Please, he said softly, standing up. You don't need to. But the applause continued. Not for fame. Not for celebrity. But for sincerity. Jonathan bowed his head slightly, hands clasped together, overwhelmed by a room full of strangers responding to something deeply personal. When the applause finally faded, the host spoke again. You know, he said gently, people often talk about power like it's loud. Like it demands attention. Jonathan nodded. But what we just saw, the host continued, was quiet power. Jonathan took a moment before responding. That's the kind that lasts, he said. The interview wrapped soon after, not because they ran out of time, but because nothing else needed to be said. Some moments don't need analysis. They need space. As Jonathan left the stage, audience members reached out, not to take photos, not to ask for autographs, but simply to touch his arm, to whisper thank you, to nod with tears in their eyes. Backstage, the atmosphere was different. Crew members who had worked in television for decades stood silently, some shaken, some visibly emotional. One producer finally spoke. I've never seen anything like that. Jonathan smiled tiredly. Neither have I. He stepped into the hallway alone for a moment, leaning against the wall. The adrenaline faded, replaced by a quiet heaviness, the kind that follows something profound. He checked his phone again. No new messages. Just the memory of a voice that had spoken not to his career, but to his calling. Later that evening, as the broadcast replayed across the world, reactions poured in from every corner. Pastors shared the clip during sermons. Families watched together in silence. People who had walked away from faith paused, reconsidered, reflected. Not because of spectacle, but because of authenticity. Jonathan returned home that night exhausted, emotionally spent. He sat alone for a long time, replaying the moment in his mind. Not the cameras, not the applause, but the words that had reached him when he needed them most. Do not doubt the path you are walking. Those words echoed. And Jonathan understood something clearly for the first time. The call wasn't the climax. It was the confirmation. By the next morning, the moment was everywhere. Clips of Jonathan Roumie answering the call had flooded social media overnight. Short videos, long replays, slowed-down edits with soft music beneath them. Some focused on the instant his voice broke. Others replayed the silence in the studio, the seconds when no one spoke, when the world seemed to pause. But what surprised people most wasn't the call itself. It was the reaction to it. Comments poured in by the thousands. "I haven't prayed in years, but this made me stop. I watched this alone at 3 a.m. and cried without knowing why." This wasn't television. This was truth. Across different countries, languages, and beliefs, people responded to the same thing: sincerity. Not everyone knew Jonathan Roumie's work. Not everyone watched The Chosen. Some didn't even identify as religious. Yet the moment reached them anyway, because it wasn't about doctrine, it was about humility. News outlets tried to summarize it with headlines. Actor receives papal call on live TV. Emotional moment stuns viewers worldwide. But no headline fully captured what had happened. Because what moved people wasn't the authority of the caller, it was the vulnerability of the receiver. Jonathan didn't celebrate. He didn't boast. He didn't turn the moment into spectacle. He broke down. And in a world trained to polish emotions, that honesty felt rare. Faith leaders shared the clip as an example of quiet service. Teachers showed it in classrooms while talking about purpose. Even secular commentators paused their usual skepticism, admitting that something about the moment felt genuine, unmanufactured. Jonathan, meanwhile, retreated. He declined follow-up interviews. He avoided social media. Not out of arrogance, but out of caution. He didn't want the moment to become noise. At home, away from the cameras, he sat with it. He replayed the call, not the praise, but the reassurance. The permission to stop questioning himself so harshly. The reminder that faith wasn't something he had to prove. It was something he had to live. In private, Jonathan reflected on the years that led him there. The rejections, the uncertainty, the nights spent wondering if he had misunderstood his calling. He realized that if the call had come earlier, he might not have been ready for it. The doubt had shaped him. The waiting had humbled him. The silence had prepared him. And now, the affirmation carried weight because it hadn't come quickly. Meanwhile, stories began to surface. A nurse wrote that she had been on the verge of quitting her job after years of burnout, but the clip reminded her why she started: to serve quietly, without applause. A man wrote that he had lost his faith after personal tragedy, but watching Jonathan struggle to speak through tears made him realize that belief didn't require certainty, only honesty. A young actor shared that he had been chasing fame aggressively, but the moment forced him to rethink why he wanted recognition in the first place. None of these people had spoken directly to Jonathan. Yet all of them felt spoken to. That was the true impact. Not conversion. Not validation. But connection. Jonathan eventually returned online, not to relive the moment, but to gently redirect it. In a short message, he wrote only a few words. "This wasn't about me. It was about reminding us that faith still speaks, often when we least expect it." No hashtags. No promotion. No monetization. Just perspective. The world, however, continued to discuss it. Some praised the Pope's humility in making a personal call. Others debated the symbolism of faith intersecting with media. But even among disagreement, there was an unusual tone, less hostility, more reflection. People weren't arguing as much as they were listening. And that, too, was rare. Jonathan noticed something else in the days that followed. Strangers treated him differently. Not with excitement, but with gentleness. People spoke softer. They thanked him without exaggeration. Some didn't even mention the call. They simply said, "That moment helped me." He realized then that the call hadn't elevated him above others. It had placed him beside them. And in that realization, Jonathan felt something settle inside him, a calm he hadn't known before. The world might remember the call. But Jonathan would remember the silence that followed it. The stillness. The reverence. The reminder that purpose doesn't shout. It whispers. And those who are listening will always hear it. In the weeks that followed, Jonathan Roumie's life didn't suddenly change on the outside. There were no dramatic announcements. No new titles added to his name. No grand speeches or public celebrations. If anything, things became quieter. And that was exactly what he needed. Jonathan returned to his routine: early mornings, long scripts, silent moments of prayer before stepping into character. But something inside him had shifted. The constant tension he hadn't even realized he was carrying had begun to loosen. For the first time in years, he wasn't questioning every step. He wasn't asking, "Am I enough?" He wasn't wondering, "Am I doing this right?" He was simply present. When people asked him about the call, he answered gently, but briefly. He refused to dramatize it. It was a blessing, he would say, not a badge. That distinction mattered to him, because the call hadn't made him feel bigger. It had made him feel smaller, in the best possible way. Jonathan began approaching his work with renewed stillness. On set, crew members noticed it immediately. There was a deeper calm in him, a patience that hadn't been there before. He listened more. He spoke less. When challenges came, he didn't react, he reflected. One day, during a break in filming, a young actor approached him hesitantly. "I just wanted to say," the actor said, "I'm terrified I'm not good enough. Everyone else seems so confident." Jonathan smiled, not with reassurance, but with recognition. "I still feel that sometimes," he admitted. "The difference now is that I don't let it decide for me." That honesty stayed with the actor long after the conversation ended. Jonathan also found himself more protective of silence. He limited interviews. He turned down opportunities that felt misaligned. Not because they were wrong, but because they were loud. He had learned something essential. Purpose doesn't demand attention. It requires alignment. At home, Jonathan revisited old journals, pages filled with prayers written years before fame, before recognition. He read words he barely remembered writing. "Let me serve without being seen. Let me stay humble if success comes. Let me never forget who I am without applause." He closed the journal slowly. Those prayers had been answered, not by removing doubt, but by teaching him how to carry it. The call from Pope Leo XIV hadn't erased Jonathan's humanity. It had affirmed it. He understood now that faith wasn't about certainty. It wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up honestly, even when unsure, especially when unsure. Jonathan also noticed a change in how he saw others. He became quicker to encourage, slower to judge, more aware of the unseen battles people carried quietly, because he knew how heavy unseen burdens could be. One evening, after a long day, Jonathan attended a small, private gathering. No cameras, no press. Just conversation. Someone eventually asked him, "Do you feel pressure now? Knowing so many people look to you?" Jonathan considered the question carefully. "I used to feel pressure," he said. "Now I feel responsibility, but not fear." "What's the difference?" someone asked. "Pressure is about performance," Jonathan replied. "Responsibility is about care." That distinction became his compass. He no longer felt the need to prove faith through words or explanations. He trusted that how he lived, how he treated people, how he handled success and criticism, would speak louder. And it did. Quietly. Jonathan realized that the moment on live television wasn't a peak. It was a pivot. A turning point where validation stopped being something he chased, and became something he released. He didn't need to be seen as holy. He didn't need to be right. He didn't need to be admired. He needed to be faithful. And faith, he learned, looks a lot like consistency in small things. As time passed, the viral moment faded from headlines. New stories replaced it. The world moved on, as it always does. But Jonathan didn't lose what he gained. Because the transformation wasn't external. It was internal. And those are the ones that last. He stepped forward, not louder, not prouder, but steadier. Ready to continue walking the path he had once doubted. Now with peace. In the end, what the world witnessed wasn't a celebrity moment. It was a human one. Jonathan Roumie didn't break down on live television because he received recognition from a powerful voice. He broke down because, in that moment, years of quiet faith were finally answered, not with applause, but with reassurance. And that difference matters. We live in a world that celebrates noise. Loud success. Loud confidence. Loud validation. But the most meaningful moments rarely arrive that way. They come softly. Unexpectedly. Often when we're not trying to be seen at all. Jonathan's story reminds us of something we often forget. Purpose isn't proven by how many people notice you. It's proven by how you show up when no one is watching. For years, he walked a path filled with uncertainty. He questioned himself. He carried doubt quietly. He chose humility over attention and service over status, without knowing if it would ever matter. And then, one ordinary day, in the middle of an ordinary conversation, everything aligned. Not to elevate him above others, but to confirm that staying faithful, especially when it's hard, has meaning. The call didn't change who Jonathan was. It revealed who he had already been. And that's the lesson. You don't need permission to live with integrity. You don't need applause to live with purpose. You don't need certainty to walk forward in faith. Sometimes, the confirmation comes later. Sometimes, it comes quietly. And sometimes, it comes in ways you never imagined, but always at the exact moment you're ready to receive it. If you're walking a path that feels unseen. If you're choosing humility when pride would be easier. If you're serving without recognition and wondering if it matters. This is your reminder. It does. True power doesn't announce itself. True faith doesn't demand attention. And true purpose doesn't rush. It waits. It shapes you. And when the time is right, it speaks. Not to impress the world, but to steady your heart. If this story moved you, type Amen or respect in the comments. And tell us where you're watching from. I want to acknowledge every sincere soul here. Because moments like this aren't meant to go viral. They're meant to go deep.